Welcome to History with Herodotus, where we delve into the depths of human experience and uncover the intricate tapestry that weaves our collective past together. Today, we embark on a journey to explore one of the most pivotal and devastating conflicts in modern history, the Battle of Verdun, 1916. This brutal and transformative struggle would test the mettle of nations, shake the foundations of empires, and forever alter the course of human events. The great powers of Europe, fueled by ambition and a sense of invincibility, had been engaged in a delicate dance of alliances and rivalries for decades. The complex system of entangling agreements, designed to maintain a fragile balance of power, would ultimately prove to be a recipe for disaster. In the summer of 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, sparked a chain reaction that would draw in nation after nation, like moths to a flame. The war that ensued, initially expected to be a brief and glorious conflict, would soon degenerate into a grinding, brutal struggle that would consume entire generations. As the conflict spread across Europe, the Western Front, stretching from the North Sea to the Swiss border, became a battleground of unimaginable ferocity. The introduction of trench warfare, with its maze of earthen fortifications, barbed wire, and machine guns, created a killing zone of unprecedented lethality. The war had become a war of attrition, where the goal was not to defeat the enemy through bold maneuvers or clever tactics, but to simply outlast them, to bleed them dry through sheer persistence and determination. In the midst of this carnage, two nations stood out as bitter adversaries, France and Germany. Their mutual animosity, fueled by a century of rivalry and resentment, would make their conflict particularly vicious. The French, still reeling from the humiliation of the Franco-Prussian War, were determined to regain their honor and territorial integrity. The Germans, driven by a desire for dominance and a sense of cultural superiority, sought to crush their enemy and assert their position as the preeminent power in Europe. As we approach the eve of the Battle of Verdun, we find the French army, under the command of General Joseph Joffre, struggling to maintain its defensive lines along the Meuse River. The Germans, led by the cunning and ambitious General Erich von Falkenhayn, had been searching for a weak point in the French defenses, a place where they could apply pressure and create a breach. Their gaze fell upon the fortified city of Verdun, a strategic outpost that controlled access to the river valley and the Paris basin. Verdun, with its imposing citadel and labyrinthine tunnels, was a fortress city of immense strength and symbolic importance. For the French, it represented a sacred trust, a place where their ancestors had fought and died for centuries. The Germans, aware of Verdun's emotional significance, saw an opportunity to strike at the heart of French morale, to create a psychological wound that would never fully heal. In the months leading up to the battle, both sides engaged in a frenzy of preparation, each seeking to outdo the other in a display of military might. The Germans assembled a massive artillery park, comprising over 1,200 guns and howitzers, which would unleash a maelstrom of steel and fire upon the French positions. The French, anticipating the coming storm, worked tirelessly to reinforce their defenses, constructing new trenches, laying barbed wire, and deploying machine guns in anticipation of the onslaught. As the clock struck midnight on February 21, 1916, the German artillery unleashed a frenzy of fire upon the French positions, signaling the beginning of the Battle of Verdun. The bombardment, which would last for 9 hours, was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Over 1,200 guns and howitzers, ranging from 77mm field guns to massive 420mm howitzers, hurled a torrent of shells upon the French lines, shaking the very foundations of the earth. The French troops, huddled in their trenches, were subjected to an unrelenting barrage that seemed to have no end. The initial onslaught was designed to shatter the French defenses, creating breaches through which the German infantry could pour and capture the city of Verdun. However, the French lines held firm, despite being severely battered. As the artillery fire lifted, the German infantry emerged from their trenches, advancing in waves towards the French positions. The fighting was intense, with both sides suffering heavy casualties as they clashed in the muddy, blood-soaked terrain. On February 24, 1916, the Germans launched a fresh assault on the French positions, focusing their attention on the fortified village of Haumont. The French defenders, led by Colonel Émile Drian, put up a valiant resistance, but ultimately they were forced to retreat. As the Germans claimed the village, they discovered the horrific aftermath of their own bombardment. The streets were littered with the bodies of the dead and wounded, and the air was thick with the stench of death. The French High Command, realizing that Verdun was on the brink of collapse, rushed reinforcements to the front. General Philippe Pétain, a rising star in the French army, was appointed to take charge of the defense. He immediately set about reorganizing the French lines, creating a more flexible and responsive defensive system. As March 1916 wore on, the battle became a war of attrition, with both sides trading blows and suffering heavy losses. The Germans continued to push forward, but their advances were slow and costly. On March 6, 1916, they launched a massive assault on the French positions at Mortholm, a strategic hill that dominated the surrounding countryside. The fighting was brutal, with both sides employing flamethrowers, poison gas, and other horrors of modern warfare. In the midst of this chaos, a young French lieutenant, René Cassin, found himself at the forefront of the battle. As he led his men through the trenches, he came across a group of wounded soldiers crying out for help. Without hesitation, Cassin rushed to their aid, dragging them to safety despite being under intense fire. His bravery that day would earn him the Croix de Guerre, and he would go on to become one of France's most decorated heroes of the Great War. As the months dragged on, the battle showed no signs of abating, with both sides trading blows and suffering heavy losses. The French lines continued to hold, but at great cost. By the end of June 1916, they had suffered over 230,000 casualties, including more than 50,000 killed. The Germans, too, had paid a steep price, with estimates suggesting that they lost upwards of 280,000 men. Despite these staggering losses, the German High Command remained committed to capturing Verdun, convinced that the French army was on the brink of collapse. However, as the summer of 1916 wore on, it became increasingly clear that the Germans were not going to achieve their objectives. The French defenses had been reinforced, and their artillery was now firing with increased accuracy and intensity. On July 11, 1916, the Germans launched a final, desperate assault on the French positions at Fleury, but they were repelled with heavy losses. It was a turning point in the battle. From that moment on, the initiative passed to the French, who began to push the Germans back. As the battle drew to a close, the city of Verdun lay in ruins. The once thriving metropolis had been reduced to rubble, its streets littered with the bodies of the dead and wounded. The survivors, both French and German, were left to pick up the pieces and try to make sense of the devastation that surrounded them. As one French soldier, André Gide, later reflected, "The Battle of Verdun was not just a military defeat or victory, it was a catastrophe, a disaster that shook the very foundations of our world." In the end, the Battle of Verdun lasted for 303 days, from February 21 to December 18, 1916. It was one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the Great War, with over 700,000 casualties on both sides. The French had emerged victorious, but at great cost. Their army had been bled white, and the country would take years to recover from the trauma of the battle. Today, the Battle of Verdun is remembered as a symbol of the horrors of modern warfare. The city has been rebuilt, but the scars of the battle still linger. Visitors can walk through the trenches and fortifications that once ringed the city and see the graves of the thousands of soldiers who lost their lives in the fighting. The Battle of Verdun may be a relic of the past, but its impact continues to be felt today. It marked a turning point in the Great War, as the tide of the conflict began to shift in favor of the Allies. It also marked a turning point in the history of warfare, as the introduction of new technologies and tactics changed the face of modern combat forever. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, remember that, to understand the present, we must first understand the past.